No.
Was it carbon-based?
I don't know.
What did it want?
I don't think it wanted anything.
But it attacked you.
It mirrored me. I attacked it.
It came here for a reason. It was mutating our environment. It was destroying everything.
It wasn't destroying. It was changing everything. It was making something new.
I got sent the book by one of the producers, Scott Rudin, who suggested I read it because he thought I might be interested in adapting it. So I read it and had a kind of twin experience, which is that I really, really enjoyed reading it, and I was thinking this is fantastic and I do want to adapt it, but at the same time I was thinking I don't know how to adapt it. It's not like an obvious book to film movie where you have a kind of thriller with a thriller structure plot and you know what the beats are and where to structure them and that kind of thing.
But the structure of the story was the structure about the 5 people going into the national park to discover what the hell's going on to the world and to nature. So you had a sort of a linear journey, and that was always the journey, really, and finding out what is going on at the end.
You're going into the Shimmer?
6 days and counting.
You 3?
4. Ventress.
Dr. Ventress.
Broadly speaking, I think it has certain similarities to Ex Machina in terms of a science fiction, but a science fiction of today with real people in it, people that we recognise in a world that might be existing at this moment somewhere else.
What I thought was, I can't see a straight beat-by-beat adaptation, but the effect of reading the book had a very powerful effect on me. So what I'm going to do is, in a way, adapt my subjective experience of reading the book. I guess if it was a certain kind of thriller, you could do an objective adaptation where everyone would agree, yes, that's what happened at this moment, and that's what I felt at this moment. But I think this adaptation of Annihilation is much more personal or subjective than that.
It's funny because there's not a whole lot of dialogue in the novel, which I think is actually interesting because it gave Alex Garland a lot of space to kind of take scenes that are just summarized in a couple sentences and kind of flesh them out without kind of interference from me. But I did see it very cinematically. I'm a very visual writer. A lot of the beats in it are actually kind of taken as translations from movies I like. The way it kind of like starts as one thing and then becomes something else and then regroups and becomes a third kind of novel by the end is very cinematic in my mind.
The journey of the film, as we used to describe it between ourselves, was a journey from suburbia to psychedelia. We begin very much in the world we know, and we end in a world we don't know. And we get there like a frog sitting in increasingly boiling water, you know? And that is a description of a journey from an objective state to a subjective state. And what happens in a way to the people in this place is that they go mad. And that is, in some senses, falling deeper and deeper into your own subjective state and having it not corrected by the external objective world.
They've grown this way.
It doesn't make any sense. I think it does.
One thing about the books is I wanted them to be a series of novels with, you know, the normal kind of storylines, but I didn't want a single aspect of the natural world to be secondhand. So every detail in there is something that I've experienced in hiking and whatnot. And I've lived in North Florida now for over 20 years. The first novel, the setting is basically the 14-mile hike I do out at St. Mark's Wildlife Refuge. And I get most of my best ideas while I'm hiking. And I think a connection to the natural world is really important, especially now when so many of us have kind of lost that.
The process of creating the visuals, I think you'd have to say starts with a book, because the book puts images into the mind of whoever reads it, which obviously included me before I adapted it. So I'll have a few kind of thoughts, I suppose, and I'll relay them into the script. But then really what happens is there's a few people I then show the script to. Jock, who is an artist who I'd worked with on Ex Machina and Dread, and Michelle Day, who is part of the production design team, and Andrew Whitehurst, who's the VFX supervisor. And all of them are intensely visual minded, and they all present things in slightly different ways.
Every time I've worked with Alex, it's been very early in the process, and with Annihilation it was no different. He called with maybe an early draft of the script, and he said that he was working on it and he was interested in getting a few images together. And it's not, you know, the VFX guys at Double Negative do such a huge element of the designing and the actual concept. My stuff is more, it can be more tonal, more sort of imagery and ideas that are kind of finding the kind of, you know, the earliest kind of pointers in visually in the script.
Well, I started talking to Alex about this film when we were still finishing Ex Machina, so the gestation period has been a long time, and he sent me the first draft of the screenplay, and the thing that first jumped to mind was that the range of work in the film was going to be something that we certainly hadn't had to tackle on Ex Machina. And also, because it's the story of a journey, you need to be able to pitch and pace the objects that we add or change throughout the film so that you get the sense of the build-up of strangeness across the whole film. And that, to me, seemed like it was going to be a pretty big challenge for us.
When he first called, he said, you know, I'd just like about 5 or 6 images which kind of give a sort of overview of what this thing might look like. And again, I was like, yeah, okay, yeah, that sounds like, doesn't sound too hard. Then you start, and it's a wormhole. The possibilities, and again, and what the material demands really is very challenging. You know, that you need to walk the walk to get to the point that you need to get to make this thing feel and seem real. You know, even though it's very otherworldly.
The tone and texture, all of that stuff is fascinating because it's exactly what I would have envisioned, you know, in researching the novel.
We were looking at a lot of cell imagery, we were looking at a lot of tumour growths on creatures and on plants to see how the radiation sickness, see how those can add mutations to creatures and to plants.
And part of our notion was that how do things get destroyed at a microbiological level, at a level of DNA, and that is by nucleated substances. Where has that happened in the world, or how's that happened in our lifetime? Fukushima and Chernobyl, when we started to look around at the effects, and most references are about the damaged buildings, but we found these plants that I think are called fascinated, and they have grown with the influence of damaged DNA.
And you can even just like stick a cancer cell to a tree, for example, and suddenly it looks otherworldly and odd. And you know, those very simple things can sometimes just at least, you know, be the springboard to push you in different directions.
Then what happens is I collate the images that everyone has been putting together, and I put them together into a PDF, and that then gets disseminated to everybody, and it becomes the tonal look of the film. Well, apart obviously of thinking about Jeff's book, which is, you'd have to say, the single biggest influence, the real influences, not the post-rationalized or even pre-rationalized influences, are sort of unknown to me, I think. But if I was going to hazard a guess, I'd probably say Alan Moore, British comic book writer. I suspect there's some Alan Moore in there.
He's mentioned in the past how the Alan Moore comics were a big influence on him, and Alan is a very intellectual writer in the same way I think that Alex is.
Swamp Thing. So this will make sense to people who were fans of comic books in the 1980s, which is a niche crowd. But to those people, Alan Moore's Swamp Thing appears about 2/3 of the way through the film in these sort of frozen statue figures. So there you go, there's one.
Rolling and action.
What happened, as you say, this film's slightly hard to pin down, and that doesn't necessarily make it easy to finance at a major film studio. But you had two things happening. You had three things maybe. A script that was terrific, and then you had the writer-director's other film, in this case Ex Machina, suddenly becoming sort of the talk of America through the summer and becoming a genuine sleeper hit. And then at the same time, Natalie Portman was attached to the film, and suddenly you've got something that goes from a possibility to a probability, should we say?
And it became more of a film than a novel. And Alex convinced everybody, including Paramount, that this was going to be a movie worth doing.